Hey everybody, it's been a while.
Been a couple weeks for sure, yeah.
What has it been? 2-3 weeks?
Yeah, about 3 weeks, yeah.
We've been super lazy. I'm Elijah Samuelson.
And I'm Spencer Cook.
Welcome back to EDH Takes. And like we said, it's been a while. It's the Halloween season.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of spooky topics lined up here
In the near future, for sure.
Yeah.
But we still plan on, if we can, getting the 2 episodes out this month. So look forward to another one in a week or so if that works out.
Yeah, we're going to jam out a quickie after this one, hopefully.
Yeah. You might want to be careful how you say that.
I'll say it however.
Okay, whatever makes you happy. But yeah, what's been going on with you, Eli? Anything cool, magic related you want to talk about before we get into our podcast topic?
School stuff going great.
Oh, I said magic related, but if you want to talk about your life, that's fine too, I guess.
Well, actually, it is kind of magic related because despite playing Magic,
you're having a good time.
I'm still doing pretty well. Like, it has not affected my brain chemistry.
That's good.
It has not damaged me.
That's good.
Apparently, I'm like the savant in my math class because I thought I totally bombed the first math test, and then we got the results back, and I got 100%. And then he's like, only 4 of you guys got 100%. And then we had a second take-home exam, and then had some extra credit on it. So I got the results back, and I got 41 out of 35. And he was like, yeah, only one person did this, so you should be real
happy.
Real fucking proud of yourself.
That's some math that even a Magic player can understand. Bigger number over smaller number means good.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing that we like to do a lot is just joke around about how Magic negatively impacts our lives, but we love it anyway. Like, oh my god, I got so mad playing Magic this time. Magic is making me a worse person.
Yeah.
But
we have data.
We have the data.
As in our personal experience sometimes, but not all the time.
Yeah. But today, our main topic is going to be talking about the power level discussions / the power level scales that have been kind of, I'm gonna say it, plaguing our format. Just to keep it 100, keep it a buck with you guys.
So it's come to this.
Yeah. To give you a little bit of a teaser about our opinions on it. We're pretty much of the opinion that the power scale is not necessary, and it actually does a disservice, does harm to the discourse in general. So to prove that point, or at least to try to support that point, we're going to go through a lot of content creators. A lot of content creators have made videos on this topic, and we're going to
definitely
look at a lot of stuff like that and kind of talk it through. So
that's a lot of stuff that we went through. Pretty much it's kind of a debate about how to quantify your deck's power level, and honestly, like, people have been doing this for such a long time. They'll be like, they usually go 1 to 10. Like, my deck's it's a 4, or it's an 8, or what's the thing? Every deck's a 7. Right?
Every deck is a 7, according to Magic players. Many Magic the Gathering players ask, "What is your deck power level?" And the answer is 7.
And the road to this was paved with noble intentions, because the idea of the power level system is to make sure that everyone can play a game and feel like they contributed to it, and that the game ended in a satisfying way.
Yeah, because in Magic, one of the, or at least in Commander, I should say, there's a lot of diversity, to be nice about it, among decks, and if the pairing of decks isn't adequate, a lot of players can come out of the experience having a bad time, and generally the point of at least casual Commander is for players to have fun and enjoy themselves. Not winning is a part of the game, but it's not usually the main goal, or at least for many players it's not the main goal.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the power level debate, though, is that more often than not, it seems to lead to people feeling more deceived or more misled than if there had not been a discussion. It seems like people will say, oh, this deck was a 7, then the game gets to the end of it, it's like, that deck wasn't a 7, that was like a 10,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times the power level discussion can cause more salt than just the deck itself. And well, I guess it's the deck that's causing the salt, but the salt is amplified by some what you think is like some deception by that player, like they misrepresented their deck or something. But a lot of the times, Eli, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that most people aren't trying to misrepresent their deck. It's just that every player has a different interpretation of the scales, right?
Ultimately, I think this boils down to an argument in semantics. Mm-hmm. And so, we're going to arrive at our thesis, which you alluded to, is that we think maybe we're all just better off without this.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky in like different. There's a lot of different settings you can play Commander, and some settings lend themselves more to a power level discussion and some less. But at least when you can avoid it, I would recommend trying to maybe go without it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. But we're going to address the opposition first. We're going to say, like we said, this is good, well-intentioned. People are trying to eliminate confusion by making a lot of rules, you know?
Yeah.
Right? Every game's better when you add a bunch more rules and a lot of more things to remember, right?
Of course. But yeah, there's probably more power level like rank, or what is it, power level tiering systems than I have fingers on my hands, and I am a perfectly healthy man with his full 10 fingers. So
do you want to get into our list of various content we've consumed and podcasts and articles and
Reddit threads, stuff like that? Sure. Yeah. So for our first thing we're going to talk about is this EDH power level guide that I'm not sure exactly how this came to be. Was it like a consensus, or was it one person made it? Do you know, Eli?
So it was one person made this and posted it on EDH, and it was just a pretty heavily upvoted and like kind of top of the site. You know how Reddit works, so they kind of boost a thing for a while. And I think a lot of people this resonated with them.
So a lot of people like defaulted to something like this, or if there's like a discussion among a play group, people may be like, okay, let's consult the EDH power level guide.
And I don't know if you remember this, the Discord around the power level debate was really big last year, over COVID.
In 2020, yeah.
Like a lot of people, like a lot of the stuff we're going to reference was from around there. And I just mostly put this one because this is what they went off of in the MTG Goldfish Commander Clash podcast that we're going to talk about later.
Episode 3, yeah.
So I thought this would be a good thing to go over. And we're not going to read everything from this, but it's basically, it's the 1-10 scale. And they have this nice little color-coded graphic.
Yeah, so even Commander players can read it.
Yeah, and it's going from 1 being... They have it broken up into 1 and 2 as unfocused decks. 3 and 4 being focused decks. 5 and 6 being tuned decks. 7 and 8 being optimized, and 9 and 10 being competitive.
And those the definitions of those phrases being, I guess, laid out in the in the contents of that.
It's kind of specific, actually. Like they've got like whole little paragraphs for everything, and it seems pretty well laid out and easy to understand. But it is still a lot of information, and not something I would expect the average person to have seen.
And one problem I have with a tier list, like, or not tier list, sorry, a tier guide, I suppose, a commander, I never know what to say. A guide like this is that the tiers described in this feel like they're just ever so slightly, or even more than that, off or askew from, I think, what a lot of players kind of think intuitively. So, for example, I think what a lot of players would call a 7, which I guess is like everything, but for the sake of argument, hear me out here. I think what a lot of players would call a 7 fits more closely to like a 5 or a 6 in this tier list. So I think it can be a bit confusing when players are operating off of different, 1 to 10 scales. And even if even if you like tell someone, oh, I'm about a 7 on the Reddit, guide, or the EDH, guide, it might not. Other players might not understand that, or even like intuitively they might like unintentionally just have like a misunderstanding of that. So
yeah, and notably, so within each level, I guess, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they have kind of a name for it. 1 being random pile of cards, and 2 is what's a ... win con, but win is spelled WYNN, and con is spelled like Cons of Tarkir.
Oh my god, it's quirky. They don't know what a win con is, so they spelled it phonetically.
Because people who aren't good at making commander decks are stupid. That's what they're saying.
No, that's not what they're saying.
But, notably, 3, 4, and 5 are all involving precons. It's normal precons, strong precons, and upgraded precons. So if you're going off of this system, it's almost like saying, do I think my deck is better than an upgraded precon? It's immediately better than a 5, right?
Which kind of, I think, not to get ahead of ourselves, I think, Eli, you and I kind of want to put precons kind of at like the base of the scale, if we had to make a scale. And, you know, if you're just going off of decks that aren't precons, like you're already losing half of the scale, 6 to 7, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, a precon can definitely...
Or 6 to 10, I'm sorry, I don't know why I misspoke there.
Can hang with other levels of decks. Like, the thing people will say within these scales is they want to keep the levels within, like, 1 or 2 levels of each other for your deck.
For finding a pod, yeah.
But I think a precon could definitely hang with some higher power level decks, and you just get away with it either through your personal skill as a player or the fact that nobody's going to mess with you because you're playing a precon.
Yeah, or at least they probably shouldn't, right? Like, threat assess you super highly because your deck is worse, right?
And that doesn't mean, like, if you end up winning or close to winning that game, it's not necessarily because your deck was stronger. It's a result of how the game went.
Yeah, and as an anecdote, like, I've won games with precons before. I mean, it's not always like versus like real decks, right, that are significantly better than mine. And it's not like a common occurrence, but it happens sometimes. You can hang sometimes. Or at least if you're not winning, you can contribute to the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, this just talking about, like, a 1 to 10 scale, I'm generally not a big fan of it, in general. I think, one, at least as it has been, so far, 1 to 10 is just too many categories, right, Eli?
It's a lot. But it's interesting that these 1 to 10 scales, so often they really shrink themselves with their criteria and how specific they get in certain things. Like I said, like precons being 3, 4, power 5 rankings in this, and going up to 5. Like we said, the thing about every deck being a 7, it's because of stuff like that. Like people think, oh, 9 and 10 is CEDH, 5 and below is precon.
Yeah.
What's between that?
And yeah, like you said, like this tier list also, says 9 and 10 CEDH. So that really like kind of makes like commander decks that are better than precons and worse than CEDH 3 tiers, 6 through 8.
See how much you've shrunk your world when really like that's, I would guess most commander decks are between that spectrum, right?
So why would you take only like less than a third of the tier ranking scale, right? That seems not necessary.
So yeah, interesting. It's not the worst thing. I think it's definitely...
It's all right.
It's kind of well made. I mean, it's a nice graphic. We're going to
put it up
in the notes and put it on the video. But yeah, let's go into our first podcast that we have somebody did about the power level rankings. We're going to start off with our boys, Jimmy and Josh from the Command Zone.
Yeah, they did a video about, like you said, Eli, about a year ago, breaking down the categories of power levels in Commander, and they kind of similar to this 10-tiered system. They did 5, but they made the 5 analogous to this sort of 1 to 10
it's
scale.
Actually really similar to this one, because this one even had the sort of thing of grouping 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, so it's very similar.
5, and they even use some of the same words for it. But this is kind of where it gets in that semantics thing, is they're saying the same thing using different words and defining things slightly differently.
Yeah, so they're using very similar words. Like, for example, on the REDH one, I believe, what 7 to 8 is optimized, and on Jimmy and Josh's one, it's also optimized. But I don't think that their 7 and 8 means the same thing as this REDH list 7 and 8.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. So that's one of the problems with this sort of discussion, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty close, but it's not as specific. Like this list, they have a specific thing.
Specific, like very rigid definitions, whereas Jimmy and Josh's is a little bit less rigid. And not to say that Jimmy and Josh's is less helpful because it's less rigid. Sometimes that's better.
Well, I think that's credit to Josh on this one, that he was willing to admit that this is not. It shouldn't be such a rigid thing. It's not like it's
not a science. It's not
Right. Yeah, I think that's something a lot of these different things have said, that it is more of an art than science.
Well, yeah, and also I think a lot of that is what a lot of them said, but there are also some that try to make it a science, right? Like we're going to talk about it later, but there's a specific 20-page document that
oh boy, yeah.
We'll get to that later.
So they broke it down in these 5 categories, starting with jank being levels 1 and 2, casual being 3 and 4, focused 5 and 6, an optimized 7 and 8, and competitive 9 and 10.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say about that in particular that we haven't already said. But, I mean, overall, I think I would say lessening the number of categories, decreasing them from 10 to 5 is a net positive. I would be happy. I think that's a good direction to move in if we are going to try to reinvent the power level scale.
Yeah, and I believe Jimmy and Josh cut the pre-con power level off at 4. They didn't go higher than 4, like even for upgraded pre-con, I think.
Yeah, so for Jimmy and Josh, you got a whole 4 if you count, or focus and optimize. If you count that as 4, 5 to 8. They got 4 instead of 3 from this one. So there you go. A little bit of an improvement, but not enough.
And one thing I noted for this video was Josh really wanted to stress that he believes putting like a mana crypt into your deck. Some people might think, well, if a deck has mana crypt, it's immediately like bumped up a power level. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to stress that doing that does not necessarily increase or decrease. Like, you don't lower your power level just by not having, like, a super optimal card in your deck.
Yeah. I think Eli, something that we had talked about before, if we think about that a little bit on the reverse side, the professor, he has his Teysa
Karl.
Thank you. Yes.
Original Teysa Orzhov Scion.
Teysa Orzhov Scion deck. And I believe I recall him saying that that's his like most competitive deck I think that he has, whatever, right? And I think he said if I take out the one combo enchantment.
Yeah, if I take out Darkest Hour, that's his way to like remove the combo and make it a more casual deck.
And he said, I don't know exactly what he said, but I think he said something along the lines of it like drops it like several power levels, right? And this kind of relates to what Josh was saying about how playing 1 or 2 powerful cards doesn't increase your deck's power level. I think that if your deck If you think that your deck goes down 3 power levels by taking out 1 card, even if it's like a combo enabler, I think your deck just was around that level to begin with.
Yeah, if you think your deck was strong just because it had a combo in it and you remove one of the combo pieces, and all of a sudden you think your deck's like a 4 or 5 because of that, I think it kind of already was, right?
I think it kind of was already a 4 or 5. So I agree with Josh in that sense that just playing 1 or 2 powerful cards does not make the deck significantly like tier levels up, but I mean obviously playing good cards makes the deck better, right? Not one good card.
Yeah, I think we met somebody at the card shop a couple months ago, and they were asking about ways to make their deck better, and I think at a point they ended up picking up like just a bunch of combo pieces for generic blue and red combos that you could do.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of like, oh, that's not really going to make your deck that much better. It'll just
give you combos in your deck, right? Like it'll put ways to win, but like it doesn't make any of the bad cards in your deck not bad, right?
It doesn't give you more consistency, really.
Sure, it just lets you maybe sometimes get a win. Mm-hmm. You're still playing like a shitty divination or something in the deck, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, is there anything else you have to say about the Command Zone episode, Eli?
Yeah, I really didn't think they said anything too controversial, just pretty much the basic. They didn't really reinvent the wheel on this one. Again, this was kind of at the sort of the precipice of this conversation.
But I guess it's not really their job to reinvent the wheel, because for a lot of people, the command zone is the kind of first entry point, or not entry point, but they're like for new players, maybe command zone is like the go-to like podcast, right? So if they can just give like a brief overview of what a lot of players think, that's probably doing their job, right?
Yeah, if anything, it was more of a way to introduce new players to the idea of a power level ranking, because I think a lot of new Commander players, especially very casual ones, might not even consider there's like a power scale.
Yeah, and I mean, and to that extent, I think they did a good job with that, right?
Yeah.
We're giving you guys props. Savor it. No, I'm just kidding. Well, next, we're going to talk about the Commander Clash.
The guys. Commander Clash crew. And so they had an episode of their Commander Clash podcast where they talked about, are power rankings bad, actually? So kind of, we stole their idea.
A little bit. But yes, they had this, like, I think it was about an hour and 40 minutes, a very long episode, probably longer than ours is going to be. Mm-hmm. But they the first thing they did in their episode was they went through this REDH Reddit thread, or like the Reddit, the image, and then they like compared, what they thought about those, and they talked about all that stuff, but I mean, we've already done that, so we can probably move past that part of their podcast. Yeah, they were just
kind of discussing if it makes sense, and all the guys on the crew, except for Tomer, were pretty against the idea of the power ranking system.
Yeah, and that's...
at least on the 1 to 10 scale.
That's Saffron Olive, Krim, the Agent Avenger, and Richard, who is the EDH...
I think he's the owner of MTG Goldfish.
Yeah. MTG Goldfish owner. They all, with the exception of Tomer, were like tiered system, or like numbered systems, kind of cringe.
Mm-hmm.
And Tomer was the lone man to defend. I think he really liked specifically this scale, this REDH one.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you know a lot about Commander and you're reading through this scale, parts of it will make sense. I think you might like look at your deck and be like, oh yeah, I think this makes sense. This seems fair.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like somebody did put thought into this. It's just, they put a lot of thoughts into it.
One thing I disagree with is, they, at some point in the episode, they ranked several of their own decks, or one each of their own decks, according to this scale.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that Tomer said in the episode was, we may have had some disagreements on our on our numbers, but we kind of came to an agreement because the scale is kind of, the scale means what it means. Like, there's not really much disagreement that's possible because you can just look at the scale and see pretty obviously. But I don't really agree with that. Like, I feel like even the stuff that is like very rigid in this scale is still to a degree up to interpretation by the players. So I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's as simple as you can think.
Yeah, and it's funny when they were going through and ranking their own decks, they kind of did the thing naturally, at least 3 out of 4 of them, of ranking their deck around a 7, which everyone says the thing, oh, my deck is a 7.
Yeah.
And I think they even acknowledged that kind of meme
They're
before
like,
doing this.
Yeah.
But yeah, they took Krim's Esper Super Friends deck, and he was like, I think it's an 8, maybe a high 7. And this is another thing a lot of people do with these rankings too, is like when you have the 1 to 10 system, you want to say, no, this, especially with something as precise as this REDH list, you want to say, no, this is a 7, this is 6, not, oh, it's like a 6.5 or a 7. Because that just...
it muddies the water a little bit.
Muddies it a lot. But, people naturally kind of do that, being like, oh, it's an 8, it's a high 7. Tomer said he was the only one that was just like straight up, it's a 7. Then Seth was like, yeah, it's a 7, maybe a 6.
Yeah.
Richard,
it's a
bless
6.
him, he's just like, no, this is like a 2. Because he had his bird tribal deck.
Yeah.
And then they went over the list and revised their rankings to 6, 6, 6, and Richard's up to a 4.
And then they specifically said Richard's such a good player that his is a 6 when
they
he plays it with us.
They had to drag Richard up. He's like, no, guys, this is a 2. This is bird tribal. It's literally like one of the worst things you can be doing. They're like, oh, Richard, you beat us all the time, though. We can't think that we got beat by a 2, pretty much.
Yeah.
But speaking of Richard, we were talking about earlier the idea of shrinking this list by saying like this is a pre-con, this is CDH. Richard brought up a really good point in this episode where he mentioned that maybe the jank pile decks and CDH decks shouldn't even fall on this scale.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that because, like, jank decks or whatever, like, this is to say, like, decks that are so bad because they're, like, just pretty much not even trying to be good decks, and the CDH decks, which are kind of a category of their own, there's really no point to have them on the scale because if you're playing one of those decks, like, it's very clear, like, what you're playing, right? There's no ambiguity there. My deck is all of the worms in the game and nothing else, right?
Yeah, and especially CDH players, they're not looking to play with non-CDH decks, so why have them in a list built to compare decks?
Yeah. One thing that Seth said in this episode was that 1 to 8 power levels, the goal for those players is, like, to socialize, and 9 to 10, the goal is to win. So that's him kind of drawing a distinction between CDH and, like, I guess, for lack of a better word, normal decks. So yeah, what's the point of even if I don't necessarily agree with what Seth was saying there, but if that's the case, why not just not include them on the tier list or whatever, on like because CDH doesn't need to have a power level discussion, right?
Right, and correct us if we're wrong, but it's our understanding that a pod of CDH players sit down, they're not all like, so what's the power level? You playing tier 1? You playing tier 2? They just play, right?
Yeah, from what I understand, that's the case.
And, they might understand within the game, like, oh, he's playing tier 1, I'm playing tier 3, and this other person's playing tier 3, so maybe we'll threat assess differently because of that. But it's not like it's not a whole big thing. It's not a big discussion in a power ranking system.
Yeah, so if that's the case, then what's the point of having them on the scale? Another thing that Richard said later on is that if even the most enfranchised players can't settle on power levels, like they can't even like agree or like make like an easy to understand scale, then how should we expect like new players or even like 80% of the Magic players who aren't super enfranchised to do the same? I think it's a pretty good point, right? Like if it's so difficult that even the best players can't, or the best,
yeah,
what I mean?
I think we're totally in agreement with that. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, and that's being the fact that so many players have different opinions on the power level scale just makes it even that more challenging to understand as a new player or even a average player.
Yeah, it's again, it's a big semantics thing. Like, what is a good deck? What is a strong deck? Some people might say this deck, by most people's definition, it would be a good deck, but it's not a combo deck. So they're like, I think it's a bad deck.
Yeah,
it's not viable.
I know some people who think that way. And nothing wrong with that. It's just the misunderstanding between the players, right? A miscommunication.
It has a lot to do with somebody's environment that they play in, kind of their sort of Magic player culture, if you will.
Yeah. So, yeah, for example, if you play with a lot of, pre-con decks or pre-con tier decks in your play group, someone might have like a good pre-con and you're like, oh, that's like a really good deck, right? But maybe in some other context or some other culture of players, that you'd come to them and be like, okay, I got a really good deck, and then they pull out their, upper level casual decks, and you're like, oh, this doesn't compare.
I'm sure we've all known the person who mostly plays within their own local group of friends or a small LGS meta or something, and they just clean house all the time, and they move to a different environment, and they have a real reckoning, a real crisis of faith,
an epiphany, if you will,
when they just get their teeth kicked in.
They're like, oh my god, the people I was playing with, it was just a totally different environment from this other environment, and I'm just not, what I'm doing isn't cutting it anymore.
I know that I've had that moment before. Have you had that awakening moment in Magic, Spencer?
Yeah, I think so.
When you go from thinking like, man, like I'm real hot shit because I went around here, and then you go to a bigger environment and
where you play with better players, people with better decks, and you're like, oh man, I really, they're seeing what I'm doing. Oh no.
You go from being the big fish in a small pond to the small fish in a big pond.
Yeah. But that happens sometimes. Well, is there anything else you want to say about the Commander Clash episode?
It was a really good discussion. I really liked a lot of the points that Richard made in this one. And yeah, I think they were able to discuss things in a pretty healthy way, and
yeah,
it's a good discussion. I like their episodes, because having the 4 of them there too, it's good to get a lot of varying opinions, because they don't just like circle jerk each other.
Yeah, we've talked about them in the past, and I do like that they tend to disagree on things a lot.
So when Tomer steps up and starts being cringe, they can just like crack their knuckles and be like, "What do we tell you, old man?"
Yeah. Undo inversion. Flashbacks. All right. Well, so our next topic or I guess source is the professor, good old Tolarian Community College, and
back to the classics.
Yeah, and he made a couple videos about power level. The first one we want to talk about is a video he did with Olivia.
Yeah, Olivia Gober-Hicks from the Commander Advisory Group.
Mm-hmm.
He has his untitled Magic the Gathering podcast that he has various community members come on and talk about, usually Commander, but sometimes other stuff relating to Magic.
Was she a Commander Advisory Group member at the time?
I think she was. I think she has been for a while.
Cool. But yeah, they talked about a lot of things related to this. Eli, you want to kind of mention what some of their points that you want to talk about?
Yeah, they had just a pretty basic discussion talking about, I like that she brought up in the beginning that they were discussing the merits of the power ranking system, like the 1 to 10, and Olivia says, it can work if you know the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really good point because especially, like I was saying about semantics, if you know people, you generally know what their definitions for things are.
Yeah, if someone says their deck is a 7 and you play against their deck, you assuming they have any sense of consistency in their internal scale, you can kind of get an idea for what that means from their perspective.
Yeah, and you might disagree, but at least you understand, hey, this person believes this because of this.
Yeah, you understand, okay, their 7 is like similar to my 4, my 6, my 8, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they're right on the money with you and you guys are perfectly in sync. Could happen.
Yeah, and hopefully your friends are honest too. Hopefully you trust them.
Yeah, I trust my friends more than I trust strangers most often. I hope, at least. Otherwise, maybe you need some new friends. But yeah, I don't know. It was just a pretty overall decent discussion, right?
Yeah, and like we said, this was where the professor was talking about his taste of deck and the idea of taking out Darkest Hour and that kind of powering it down. They both talked about this. Olivia had an anecdote of playing a Liliana tribal deck where she played the card Contamination, which if you don't know, it's a meanie no card. It's very strong. I actually don't see Contamination that often because
I think it's pretty
pricey.
Yeah,
it's an older card.
It's a black enchantment that says all lands tap for swamps or tap for black instead of, or is it? It's just lands, right?
Yeah, you have to sack a creature on your upkeep, otherwise you sack it. But yeah, then it's just all lands tap for black instead of their normal colors.
So like the obvious thing is like, I play like a Bitter Blossom or like a Ophiomancer or something, and then you play that, and you have quote unquote an infinite lock if your opponents don't have mana rocks.
If they're not playing rocks or they're not playing black, they can't really cast spells anymore.
And that kind of surprised me because I feel like if you put Contamination in your deck, you know what you're doing, right?
Yeah, she said that she played it in a game and then had to take it out because her friends were like, that was kind of rough. Like, that seems kind of a little spikier than we were going for. And she's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll just switch it out with something else. And it's like, yeah, what are you trying to do?
I don't know. Maybe it was just maybe there's some lore related to Liliana that I don't know about.
I know people like really hate Blood Moon, and we've talked about this before. That maybe like Blood Moon isn't even that bad, but I feel like Contamination is stronger than Blood Moon, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean it does require the extra step to kind of keep it around, like the creature thing,
right?
But no, yeah, Contamination does way more than it's like a different ballpark if it sticks around than Blood Moon because. I don't know. Basic lands. You could play them, okay, guys? Just letting you know.
I remember way back in the day at my community college, like casual Magic club, somebody had a copy of that card.
Contamination?
And we would play like casual multiplayer, and they just played that out. And I was playing like a mono white deck, and it's just, I lose now.
Very epic. But yeah, you want to talk about the second Professor video?
Yeah, so the first one was kind of mild, and that was around the same time that everyone was having this discussion. And he did another follow-up video. I think it was around 6 months later. And his video was titled, "It's Time to Move On from Commander Power Levels." So I think everyone was probably just sick of the discussion at this point.
Yeah, and he was like, we're moving on from the discussion. It's kind of a double entendre. Like, we're moving on from the discussion, and also we need to move on from the actual thing.
The professor's like, I, as head of the Magic community, has decided.
Well, he is one of the biggest. Is he the biggest?
He is the biggest.
He is the biggest, yeah.
Josh is trying to take the crown, but he keeps shooting at the king. He keeps missing.
Yeah. If you're aiming at the king, you better not miss, as they say.
So the professor did this nice kind of, I think it's around half an hour long video where he suggests 5 alternative things that you can do rather than just throwing out a number, because that's another thing they talked about on the Untitled MTG podcast with Olivia, was that the number thing, that doesn't mean much.
Yeah.
And the first thing the professor said was that you should ask before a game is, how long do we have to play? Or like, how long of a game do you want?
Yeah, so like, are we playing for an hour? Are we playing for 3 hours or whatever? Or something. You could also interpret that to mean how many turns do you want the game to go? It's a little bit ambiguous, but
yeah. And obviously that's not something that's super easily controlled.
Yeah.
But it's at least,
it's something, right?
Get some kind of expectation.
Yeah,
on the same page.
It can I don't know if that will do a good job of fine-tuning power levels that are like close together, but it might do a good job of if you're like 4 tiers apart from each other, finding out that. Because like if someone's like, oh yeah, I can win, I win, I plan to win on like turn 5, and you're like, oh okay, I did that. That tells me a lot, right?
Yeah, because usually winning earlier in the game is an indicator that your deck is stronger. Not always, so it's not a perfect system.
Yeah, everyone's had that experience where you've had just like a god hand or something, or like a really fast start, and you somehow managed to assemble a win earlier than, is normal, or maybe even exceedingly early, and that's like I don't think that's what this question is asking. Outliers happen in every game. You can't account for that.
And on the other side of that spectrum, you could have like that same like really fast deck, like more competitive deck, and just everyone just spends all their resources like fighting you and beating you into the dirt, and the game ends up going super long because of that, because it's just you're spending out everyone's resources super early.
Yeah. So
the opposite can happen.
So the next one is, are we playing to win or playing to socialize? And, this is a bit of a strange question to me. And I mentioned earlier that Seth mentioned this as well, so I think they kind of agreed with the professor here. But I don't think I agree. Like, I don't think there's really much of a distinction, right? I mean, I guess you could argue playing to win means you're being like as cutthroat as possible, like it's your main prerogative and you really don't care. Mm-hmm. But like, I don't know. I think playing to win is a core part of the game in general.
I feel like every Commander player is playing to socialize. Like even CEDH, right?
I think so.
It's what you do with your friends.
I think they're synonymous, honestly. I guess the distinction might be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna like do some plays because like I think it's a funny meme, or like we're gonna like make some like alliances like for like kind of dumb reasons. Like, okay, whatever. I guess if that's your distinction, then fine, so be it. But
yeah, or I'm gonna kill myself in this game because
I feel like it's funny. Yeah. But like overall, I don't think the are we playing to win or playing to socialize is a helpful question at all.
Yeah, because I think there's even a lot of people like us that
I would say
we're playing to socialize, but also we're playing to win. Just like once the game starts.
Yeah.
I think your best games happen when everyone's playing to win.
I suppose if you reword that to like will you I don't even know. Never mind. I'm gonna drop that right now. Drop it like it's hot. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess it's like maybe the better question is how important is winning to you? I don't know.
That might be better because like I'm not looking to ruin everyone's night to win. Like I'm not trying to go to like as much as any means necessary to win.
Right.
So maybe that's like a better question, right? Like I guess you can ask it, are we playing like CDH mentality maybe? Maybe that's a better question.
I think that's the main purpose of this question, is just to like distinguish between CDH and non-CDH, but I think that's also throwing up the assumption that CDH players aren't having fun.
Yeah, I don't like that.
I don't like that at all, because that is fun.
I mean, if you've ever watched any CDH like streams or like videos, like they're socializing, they're cracking jokes and they're doing things like that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
They're just sitting around having a good time too. They're just maybe paying a little bit more attention to the game mechanics, I suppose, and the rules and the timings.
Next question. I kind of like this one. what do you not like playing against? And I almost feel like if there is something you really don't want to play against, that the onus should be on you to mention it.
Yeah, that's
because there's a lot of things that can cheese people off in Commander.
Like it shouldn't be my responsibility to ask about every single thing that you might not like, because like a lot of players dislike a lot of things, and I can't ask about everything. Like I can't be like, oh, do you not like the Secret Lair Walking Dead cards, or like is that a problem? Or I can be like, oh, do you not like Voltron? Like,
do you not like counter spells?
Do you not like Doomblade? Is that okay if I play Doomblade? Is murder a little bit... Do you need a trigger warning for your murder? Sorry. Stuff like that, though. I mean, like, I think it's your responsibility, like you said, Eli, to let people know if there's something you're uncomfortable playing with.
Yeah, and he mentions that in the video. He has a good example of saying maybe people have been playing games all night, and their last game they just finished was a really long game where there was at least one player playing a control deck, and just it didn't end up being a lot of fun, and it went way too long. So maybe the next game you're like, I want to play a faster game this time. Let's play a not.
Yeah, so hey, is you guys cool to not play a control deck for this one? Yeah, sure. Or maybe whatever. Yeah, so I think that's a pretty helpful question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Or I suppose an alternative might be like, what kind of game are you looking to play? Might be another way to phrase that. Yeah. I think a lot of people have echoed that kind of. I think that's what is it? I hate your deck. Is that how they do that? They do that a lot.
Yeah, they've been kind of doing the Rule Zero pregame discussion.
And I think I've heard that phrase before. But number 4 on the list of the 5 alternatives from Brian, Tolarian Community College, is pick a deck for the table, not the game. And what that kind of means is, one thing he brings up is this idea of like a bunch of different kinds of commanders. So like good commanders and bad commanders. And I think he's saying like even if all like decks are like a 6 or whatever, if your opponents are just playing like better commanders or like commanders that will like just kind of take over the game, you might have more fun if you play something similar as opposed to. Yeah.
And this kind of feels like its own smaller power ranking system almost, but he's kind of got a point. He breaks it into 3 different kinds of commanders. First being classic tier commanders, which he defines as like just cool creatures with cool abilities. Nothing like, a good example might be like Kresh the Blood Rated.
Sure.
It's not like an engine or anything. It has a unique ability.
Yeah. The
second type being a strategy or payoff tier, which is something like just very like high synergy kind of build around commander, something like Feather.
Sure, Feather the Redeemed, yeah. Or I think he put Marin in this tier as well.
Yeah, so it's not like it might kind of be a good stuff deck sometimes, but it's generally more like a build around.
Yeah, maybe something like Rune or whatever,
Yeah, you play specific kinds of cards, and it could be pretty value oriented, but it's also
it's a synergy. It's a synergy. It's not just like a theme. It's like payoff for a synergy, or the synergy itself and payoff.
Right, and then the final tier being top tier, which would be a lot of the more recent commanders, stuff like Corvold. This was at the time of Golos, so Golos was on there.
Yeah, before it got
Chulane,
banned. Yeah,
or Holin.
If you want to, yeah, that's the pronunciation of Chulane. If you are, what's the origin? The place of origin of that name?
Oh, is Gaelic.
Gaelic, yeah. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these, I think you can kind of think of it as like, does this commander like generate much more resources than every other commander, or does it require immediate answers or the game ends? So something like an obvious combo commander probably fits in this category, like something like a Niv Mizzet.
Yeah, and we've talked about the kind of commander that they're designing more and more recently, where it's just the win, do a thing, draw a card.
Yeah.
And those commanders can walk the line between the strategy payoff and this top tier, because some of them are like, hey, play a wall, play a creature with defender, draw a card. Like, that's still pretty good. But it's like you have to play some weird cards to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas something like Tatiova is like, do you have lands in your deck? Draw a card.
Yeah. Even like you were saying, some of the more recent ones, like Brina, like, you know, when people attack other people, draw a card, or when you attack other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're probably not 3, but they, like you said, Eli, they probably walk the line there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, do you want to talk about the last thing Professor had here?
Yeah, final step, and this is something for after the game, not before it. He says that you should debrief after the game and have a conversation about how people felt in the game and how it went.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the stuff you can get out of that is pretty obvious. Like, if a player's not having a good time, I think you'll know. Maybe that's just me.
Hopefully you know.
Hopefully, I mean, I guess not. I shouldn't expect everyone to, because a lot of people aren't good with that sort of thing. Some people
yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes.
But I feel like debriefing after a game is good if everyone's happy. But if people aren't happy, I feel like debriefing could, or I should say, don't force a debrief on people. If someone's trying
Absolutely. If somebody gets up, they're kind of quiet. They're like quickly putting their stuff away into their bag, and they're trying to like get up and either leave or find a new game. And you're like, hold up a second, buddy. Pretty good game, right?
You like it? What'd you think?
I had a pretty good time. How about you?
So be careful how you approach that, but you know, nothing's gonna go wrong with talking about it.
I think that's a great thing to do with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's something we like to do sometimes, is talk about like, oh, if I had done this or done that, and like, it's usually not like so much venting. It's just like we like to talk about like different decision points, and
yeah, it's
pretty fun.
It's interesting. I think. Oh, maybe I was. Oh man, that didn't work out for me. But this is what I was thinking the couple turns.
Yeah, like what were you thinking there? Like, oh man, did you really not have anything that whole time? Like, no, I was bluffing. Yeah, that's kind of fun.
Yeah. Overall, talking about the professor's video, I think it's pretty good. It's at least moving in the right direction. I think the idea of just like asking questions. I think maybe having to ask all these questions. I don't think I don't want to straw man him. I don't think he's saying you have to ask them all. But it seems like a lot, right?
Right. I think the idea is maybe you can ask one of these questions or do one of these things, and if that gives you a better game experience, then it's a net positive.
Yeah.
And I'd say it is.
I agree.
But if you did take the meaning to be do all these things, or like,
yeah, if you took the bad faith interpretation of it, you might
it might seem like it's just like a new power ranking system. It's a new different discussion.
Yeah. Eli, I think you and I are just to pause this for a moment and say, talk about what we think. You and I are definitely in favor of reducing the amount of time before the game starts, because Commander games take long enough, especially when players have to shuffle up maybe 4 or 5 times.
Why do people need to mulligan? Why can't they just be better at drawing their opening hand?
Like, I'm trying to play a game here. Will you mulligan? No, I had a game last week or 2 weeks ago where I mulliganed down to 4. And it was a great game.
You mulled a 4 and you won.
Yeah, but
too powerful.
But my point here is sometimes mulligans take some time, because you mull a 4, you gotta at least take a little bit of time to shuffle up.
Yeah, oh my god, maybe we should say, if you are gonna do this whole pre-game rule 0 discussion, everything, be doing other things too.
Yeah,
move things along.
Maybe shuffle your deck while you're talking about it. I mean, I guess if you don't know what deck to pull out, I guess that's the case, but if you got an idea,
Yeah, that's another thing that sucks, is like having to wait before you even pick your deck, and then
you got to think about it,
because there's so many points of like decision paralysis to happen there. Like, oh man, which deck do I feel like playing right now? And then having to factor in like, oh, what do they like? What do they like? What do they like?
Yeah, you might even before you start the game, oh, let me read all your guys' commanders. I don't know what that does. My point here is it just takes so much time to get into a game sometimes that. Especially when you're playing with new players. If you're playing with your friends, I think usually people that you play with a lot, I think you can get a game started in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're playing with new players, I think at least with all this power level discussion stuff, it can take 5-10 minutes. And I don't think people will say that if it takes us 10 minutes to get a good game, I'm happier with that way. I don't think I am, honestly.
Yeah, I think I like the idea of talking after the game a lot more, because it feels to me like finding a good balance in the right decks to play is kind of like, you know how old-timey cannons had their like rangefinders on them, and to figure out like where you were shooting, you'd fire off a shot.
Yeah, to see, and then you compare
and then you would readjust based on the angle.
Yeah. And
you would slowly get closer to your target. I think that's just what you got to do. Is you got to fire that first shot and then see, whoa, that was way off, or that was just right. Like,
yeah, the only problem with that is if you're going to only play one game with a certain pod, then I guess you have the information for next time, but that doesn't allow you to do that kind of that reevaluation.
Right.
But I do agree with Eli. I think that is the most successful method in my life, at least. I think that's what I like the most, at least.
I think that's another favor. This is kind of unrelated, but that's another point in favor of playing shorter games of Commander, too. Like, because people like to say, what's your ideal game length? I think we saw Tomer recently had a tweet poll, and a lot of people put, like 1 to 2 hours.
Yep.
And we were like, no, less than an hour, definitely.
An hour or less, I think. Or
I mean, like 40 minutes.
I think 40 minutes to an hour might be like the best, maybe, game length for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I mean, and that was the second highest. But the highest at like 40% or something like that was because he had more than 2, so it was like 40% being the it was the majority, or it was the most.
And inevitably, at a medium power level, a lot of your games are going to go over an hour because you're playing with 4 people and they all have decisions to make. It's just going to happen.
But even like powerful CDH games or high level casual games sometimes take longer. Like it
happens, yeah.
The circumstances of the game play out in such a way that people aren't able to assemble winning boards. Board wipes happen. Interaction happens. People aren't. There's kind of like a gridlock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. So yeah, stopping any time reduction in how long it takes to start the game is good for me.
Definitely.
We'll want to move on, Eli, to the next podcast that we took a listen to get some ideas for this.
Yeah, and this wasn't a full episode. This was EDHREC Cast does what they call the EDHREC Room, which is kind of like a mini-sode podcast where they just talk about something they wanted to talk about.
One topic. I think this one was about 20 minutes long or so, maybe.
Yeah, like 20 minutes, half an hour-ish. And it's just, Matt, Dana, and Joey talking about the power level discussion, what they think about it. And I was surprised. They were actually all, like, pretty much against it.
I think you and I, Eli, tend to disagree with EDHREC podcast stuff more often than we do. Not to say that they're always wrong. Of course, like, they're respectable enough. They're enfranchised players. They know a lot of stuff.
Definitely. They're smart guys.
No disrespect, but, I think this time, I pretty much agree with almost everything they said, which is, it's a good sign, One thing in particular that I want to mention is that Dana brought up the idea that I really liked that we talked about a bit earlier, which was just make precons the base. Like, ignore that jank category. Like, just leave it off the list. And I really like that idea because what's the point of having it take up that slot?
Yeah, like, how much space do we have on the list if precon is the 1 or 2?
I think they brought up some stats from a Command Fest or like a GP Vegas. I think it was Command Fest, and they said the 1 or 2 ended up making up like 1% of the total games at the event. So what's the point really if no one's even gonna play it, or if they do play it, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, because everyone wants to think their deck is at least better than a precon, right? So.
Yeah, no one's gonna put their deck. I don't know, but also Joey talked a lot about how he really doesn't like the idea of a number scale to describe this sort of thing, and I agree with him. I think that's a pretty good point. Also, I think what they ended up deciding on was to bring it down to somewhere around 4 or 5. That seems to be the consensus of what a lot of Magic players or a lot of Magic content creators want to do is they want to like half the tiers.
Well, yeah, because you'll look at the REDH power ranking or the command zones thing, and what they're doing is they're taking this 1 to 10 scale, and they're translating the numbers into words anyways.
Yeah.
So why not just use the words? Because words, again, you can get into arguments on semantics about just about anything. Like, it's crazy. You can literally... I've seen people get into arguments on semantics with literally like going against definitions because just of how they've heard words used.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very common thing in Magic. But if you have a word, like if I say this deck is casual, that means something.
You could disagree with what it means, but I think there's going to be much less disagreement or much less room for confusion if you say casual versus 4, right? I think 4 only means something because players have internalized what that means to them. Casual is similar, but I think it evokes a little bit more meaning.
Yeah, or if I say a strong deck versus like on the scale, somebody might think, oh, strong is 6, 7, 8, 9, whereas most people would probably just think, it's 8, 9, 10.
It's hard to
it's
hard to know what people mean by that, right?
Yeah, and I think even with using words, you have to elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you mean by strong?
Yeah. One thing that some people have talked about is the idea of just like I think they talked about this with Joey and Matt and Dana, but I think they talked about the idea of kind of telling people what your deck does. So like the idea of like, oh, my deck is a Super Friends deck and it wins this way and I use this combo or whatever. And I think they had a little bit of back and forth about how much information they want to give up. I think Joey was, I don't remember who it was. I think it was Joey who said he would just like give away, like he would just tell everyone what the deck was, and Matt was like, I don't want to do that much. I don't remember exactly, but the point is that's a way some people go about kind of explaining their deck's power level, right? Or they'll say like, I play Mana Crypt and stuff like that. So
right, there's some value in a bit of hidden information. I think I wouldn't
do that,
pour my soul out to somebody. Like if they didn't ask me, I wouldn't be like, oh, my deck is this and this and this and it does that and that. But if somebody asked me, I'm not going to lie to somebody. And I think that's a lot of the things that people brought up in this is just honesty and just, be transparent a little bit. Like you don't have to give up everything.
Oh, one thing that I know that Dana does, and he mentioned, and maybe it's something you could do if you were in a similar situation, although I don't imagine many players are in a similar situation as Dana in this instance. So Dana has some very casual decks that run OG dual lands, because Dana is a man who has been through the times. He's got his dual lands, okay? And he says,
hey, you could say he doesn't look, he didn't write the book on Commander, but he sure looks like he could have.
Sure looks like he could have. No one's gonna get that. That's fine.
That's a little treat for us.
Okay. Yeah, but he like tells people this deck is very bad, but I'm running OG duels in this deck. Don't see my turn 1 Volcanic Island and think that think that I'm pulling your leg here. And while I don't think that Mana Crypt is a card that probably should go in a deck that you want to call casual, if for some reason you decide to put Mana Crypt in your Tribal Worms deck, I don't know why I keep mentioning Tribal Worms. I don't know. I'm crazy.
It's a good tribe.
Yeah.
If we had to pick like a bad tribe.
Yeah.
I'm going Worms.
Yeah. If you put Mana Crypt in your Tribal Worms deck, it might be a thing you want to mention, just so when you go turn 1 Mana Crypt cultivate or whatever, players don't just immediately think you're trying to destroy them.
Yeah, there's some cards that people have a preconception about.
Mana Crypt is one of them, and I think for a good reason.
Like, I don't know if we've used this anecdote before, but we were talking about it before the recording, how we played a game with somebody at the shop once, and you played like a fetch land.
Yeah.
And he's like, whoa, fetch land, like, he thought they must have been like, because, there's this whole circle jerk of like, reprint fetch lands, like the professor's always like, reprint fetch lands all the time. They're super expensive, but really they're like $20, some of them.
Some of them, yeah, these days. I think they get, whatever. I played a Polluted Delta, which at the time I think was like $30 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh my god, that's more expensive than like my deck.
Entire deck.
And then he plays a Vampiric Tutor.
Yeah, and step Vampiric Tutor. It's like, what the?
He probably just didn't know. I think he was a newer player.
I'm going to attribute that to ignorance, but still, it's like...
Vampiric Tutor and some other cards like that are things that kind of... they're not indicative of a power level of the deck, but they can be red flags. So something I kind of want to mention here... it's a bit of a different experience playing on Magic Online. I don't play on Magic Online very much, but when I do, it's the power the cost of cards is so different. So like in paper, when someone goes like turn 1 Misty Rainforest into Bayou, you kind of know what's up generally.
Mm-hmm.
On Magic Online, that could be just the worst deck possible. You don't even like, because those cards aren't near. Well, Misty Rainforest probably is
cheap.
But the dual lands are cheap. You can get Mana Crypt for $5.
Mana Crypt's cheaper than Soul Ring on Magic Online.
Yeah, half the price. Stuff like Sylvan Libraries, cents. So it's a bit of a you got to take your environment.
Well, it's also like Josh was saying too. I don't think the one card. I don't think that makes much of a difference. It's not somebody plays their first fetch land. Don't hold it against them. It's the 10th fetch land they play that hold against them.
The 10th fetch land, or the turn 1 fetch land exploration. Land carpet flowers into
right. It's like, I don't think one card does not a point difference make. I've got a more competitive deck that I consider maybe lower a rung on the list because I'm missing several cards, but I don't consider it that way because I don't consider it less on the list because I'm missing, I don't know, say
replenish.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't have replenish. It doesn't make it one whole point worse. I don't have replenish and these 7 other great cards that are very expensive.
Well, now that we're done with the EDHREC cast, I think it's time we've talked about a lot of different people's perspectives and their own systems and their own rankings, but we have the end-all, be-all, the alpha and omega, PJ, the war leader.
Yeah, PJ, Commander Replay, he's got a pretty different take on the power scale discussion. So I think it's worth diving into because it is different.
He's got an interesting system. Yeah, he did a video titled, I think, something along the lines of like, your deck is not a 7, or it's like a different way to look at the power level thing.
Something like that, yeah.
And he suggests, he starts off talking about a couple of things, and he says, you should think of your deck like an RPG character. Meaning it's got, maybe some stats are more full than others.
Yeah, maybe you have 10 in your strength stat, but only 3 in your speed or whatever, right? And not exactly those words, but you can kind of equate some of the strengths of a deck to those to kind of RPG stats.
Yeah, and you should know your strengths or your possible weaknesses and how those compare to other decks.
Yeah, so it can be a way for players to kind of decide what they're want to play against or not. Like, oh, is this deck like really fast? I got to make sure I either have good removal to stop it or playing something just as fast, right? Something like that.
Yeah, and then he goes into a couple of different sections of like things to check on. And the first one is this deck a combo deck or is it a deck that doesn't have any combos?
And I definitely think it could be smart to check that because there are some players who really, really dislike combos and will be upset about combos. But also just from the perspective of like how strong things are. I mean, like it can feel bad if you're trying to play like a non-combo game and you get kind of like out of nowhere comboed, like from the hand kind of stuff where there's no like indication that could have happened. Depending on what kind of game you're playing, that can be a feel bad.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he even made the distinction on his graphic that combo decks will often fall under higher power and non-combo decks might be lower power. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but it's usually oftentimes combo decks are higher power.
It's not like a definitive thing, but it can be a heuristic, I suppose, to use.
Mm-hmm. But it's like we were saying earlier, just like putting a combo in your deck doesn't necessarily mean your deck is super strong.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess maybe to describe why it might be important to do that, have this combo discussion is because if your opponent is playing a combo deck, it might be important for you to make sure you have a way to stop a combo because some combos, don't really require, they don't really require permanence in play. Some combos are just kind of, I cast this spell and I win, and you have to have like stack interaction or something to stop it. And if that's the case, it probably is a good idea to play a deck that has some mechanism to fight back, right?
Right. How I feel about combos is they're fine, but if you know somebody is playing a combo deck versus somebody who's not playing a combo deck, person not playing combo deck might have a pretty full board state, but a low to smallish amount of cards in their hand. And you might have to evaluate the combo player with no board state, but a full hand and like equal access to mana as an equal threat in that game.
And that really, it makes the combo player oftentimes kind of upset because they're maybe not doing anything, but also like it's just, it complicates everything a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it might be a good question to ask, at least according to PJ. The next question, or I guess not ask, but the things to check with players is your deck playing, single card finishers versus decks that don't play single card finishers? There's kind of like a distinction maybe to be made. And when he says single card finishers, I think he's thinking about cards like Craterhoof Behemoth or something that will just kind of win the game out of nowhere.
Torment of Hailfire.
Yeah.
What's the take 2 extra turns spell?
Expropriate.
Time stretch.
Time stretch. Expropriate. Stuff like that. And these are kind of effects that if one player is playing with access to these kinds of things versus 3 players that aren't, it can get a bit tricky, kind of in the same way that we talked about combos, right?
Yeah, we talked about on our last episode cards like this, like, Bolas' Citadel maybe, like Savala's Stampede, something that, like, it might not necessarily, like,
immediately win,
be a finisher, but it could propel you, like one card that just shoots you into first place.
A card like Rise of the Dark Realms, right?
Yeah, Rise of the Dark Realms oftentimes can win you the game, but it might not necessarily, but it'll definitely probably make you winning for a second.
Insurrection or something, kill everyone kind of thing.
Right.
It's a bit of a fragment of the past, but, still.
Yeah, and then another thing to consider is what turn do you win? And he had this as a scale from turn 0 being CDH to turn 10 being pretty casual, and kind of turn 6, 7 being like mid to high power in there.
Yeah, something like that. One thing I want to mention about that is, it's not a be all end all. A CDH deck could be a CDH control deck that is not trying to win the game before turn 15 or so, but that doesn't mean it's any less powerful. It just is, all I'm saying is that the turn you win isn't always indicative of the power level. It just can be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, besides that, one thing that PJ mentioned is to kind of check how much ramp players are playing, and I'm not really sure where he's going with this. Do you understand really?
PJ hates the green player, and PJ is of the belief that oftentimes the winner of a game of Commander is just the person who is able to generate the most mana, or whoever has the most mana at the end of the game is more than likely the winner. And he feels that having more mana is often kind of the indication of that. And so I don't know really what you're supposed to do about that. Like if you're like mentioning like how much ramp you have, like what the response is. Like, am I supposed to pull out mass land destruction or
like if
just destroy all your mana rocks?
Like if you're having a discussion at the table and someone's like, yo, how much ramp do you play? It's like, I got like 20 sources of ramp. Like what do I do with that information, right?
Yeah, and like what kind of ramp are you playing? Like that could all be 4 CMC plus ramp. Like that's not aggressive. That's not even very good. But on the same token, it could be 10 pieces of fast mana.
Rituals.
So
could be, like 10 2-mana ramp spells or something, right? I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a lot to... I don't know what you're supposed to do about that. I mean, every deck plays... I'd say most decks play a lot of ramp.
Yeah, I mean, some decks will find themselves not playing ramp spells, but generally, like, you'll find 2-mana rocks or something similar in many decks. Many decks.
Mm-hmm. And I think another thing that he asks, which I think is the more pertinent question, is like how much value do you generate? Like what are the kind of value engines in the deck like?
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, I think that's sort of a thing every Commander deck does, right? Like if you ask somebody, does your deck generate some form of value? They're going to say yes.
Right? I don't know what Commander player can say no to that, right?
Yeah, there might be some very specific decks where that's not necessarily the goal, but you kind of have to play the game, right?
I guess maybe the what he's getting at there is maybe there's like a separation between something like a Yorian like value, like you can't run them out of value kind of effect, versus like a maybe more standard like value engine that can be interacted with, or at least at least doesn't explosively make a ton of value. I'm not sure, but besides, similar to that, how many cards, like how much recursion in the deck, because PJ said some stuff about like how having just access to like an Eternal Witness or something like a Reanimate, like it makes a deck a lot more powerful, because the idea is like you get your best card kind of twice, and there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, it's sort of a form of redundancy, much like tutors, which is another thing that he mentions that maybe you should mention if you play tutors, or how many you have, because I think there's this association of tutors just indicating stronger strategies, or oftentimes even combo strategies. Like you might see a tutor and think, oh, well, is there a combo deck?
Yeah, tutors is a weird topic for me, because like obviously a lot of tutors, especially a lot of the good tutors, are indicative of a very strong deck, but you can just as easily play a lot of powerful tutors in a deck that doesn't have good things to tutor for, and the tutors aren't really pulling their weight in that kind of deck, right? Mm-hmm. So that being said, that probably doesn't happen too often, but tutored is not a good deck make. It just probably is a good deck.
A more consistent deck, maybe. But
yeah.
If you're playing bad cards or a weird strategy, like it just makes that more consistent.
So maybe it's more, if you're wanting to tell people, maybe you can be like, oh, my deck plays a bunch of tutors, but I'm really just going to tutor for this or whatever.
Yeah, and PJ also mentioning mean cards, which I think is just hate bears, stacks pieces, winter orb, stuff like that.
Yeah, just general players don't like certain things. Also, he mentions deck repetitions. So, like, the idea that if you've played a deck a bunch, that will, one, mean that you have more experience playing it, so you're better at playing the deck, and two, have potentially made, cut some of the bad cards, replace them with good cards, like refined it, right?
Yeah, the idea of practice makes perfect, and I suppose that does help you refine the deck. Mm-hmm. So I like the idea of that, but I don't know if your skill as a player or your familiarity with a deck necessarily should be something that factors into like ranking your deck's power level.
Yeah. And I also, like, who's to say that the deck can't be just like pretty good on the first try, right? Like sometimes you just build a good deck and you get lucky and you realize, okay, I actually just built this really well and there's not many changes I want to make, right? Like, so I don't know if that's really important.
Yeah, some people are a little bit better at evaluating how cards will work with other cards, or just like which cards are good than others, and they'll build a deck that's just like, they're like, oh, this is all good cards, and so it turns out to be a pretty good deck.
Yeah.
But not everyone has the gift, Spencer.
Not everyone has the gift of foresight, as we call it. A lot of people are stuck in Magical Christmas land when they build their decks.
Yeah, definitely.
Avoid it like the plague. But overall, I think PJ's kind of discussion about thinking about your deck like an RPG character was kind of an interesting breath of fresh air. Looking at all these topics, it was definitely the most different of them all, and I kind of like it in that way.
Yeah, I think that's nice. I think that's good discourse to have a different opinion sometimes.
Yeah.
Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, it's not just like we watched. We were doing some research for this, and not throwing shade or anything, but we came across we just searched like commander power levels into YouTube to get the videos.
Yeah,
and we found there's a newer channel, the Commander Mechanic, and his video was like titled like a new way to look at commander power levels or something, and I was like, oh, good, somebody solved it.
Yeah.
And we watched the video, and it's literally just like the same thing as the 1 to 10, but broken down into like the 5. Like I
think you had 4.
Did. Yeah, something like that.
And just saying, there was nothing wrong with the video, and his scale was all right, but like, yeah, it wasn't it wasn't the new thing that I feel like it proclaimed to be.
Yeah, you didn't reinvent the wheel, you just made it into a square.
But yeah, do we want to move on to our last source that we want to look at here, which is we've alluded to. It is the fated.
Oh my god tier.
This is the Omega cringe, in my opinion. The Alpha Omega of cringe. This is the Play EDH Discord Compendium. Power level Compendium.
Power level Compendium. Doesn't that sound like an epic tome that should be unfurling? It kind of is a tome. It's very...
Are you familiar with the Iliad? This is kind of
this is an epic.
This is well, that old classic CEDH meme of the Gitrog monster, how to play Gitrog monster deck document.
Oh, that's the primers.
That's 80 pages long or something. Well, this is that of power level power level discussions. This is a 21-page document for playing Commander on the Play EDH Discord.
Yeah, over Spell Table, I believe.
Yeah, would you like to explain the process that goes into playing on that? Finding games in that Discord, Eli? Because I'm not sure if you know about that stuff.
So I know a little bit. It's been a while since I really kept up with this, and I don't hear too much about it lately. But yeah, so you go on the Discord, right? Mm-hmm. And you say what kind of games you're looking for, but you also have to submit your decks, right?
Yep.
To the moderators.
Yep. So you go in there and you submit a deck, and then the mods of the Discord will tier your deck into a specific power level, and you are only allowed to find games in that power level. And
you're like, oh, great arbiters.
Oh, great Play EDH arbiters. Please assign us into pods. Thank you. And they have a lot of very, very explicit and interesting tiering decisions. And we're not going to read the 21-page document, but maybe if you want to give a couple...
We'll link it in the show notes.
If you want to go through it and very funny.
If you got an extra hour.
To begin, one thing that is very interesting is that they have specific banned cards in different levels of play. So they have 5 levels of play titled Battle Cruiser, Low Power, Mid Power, High Power, and
Maximum Power.
Why don't you just read all of the banned cards for each thing, Eli?
So to start off, banned at Mid Power, Low Power, and Battle Cruiser level, you have Gaia's Cradle and Mana Crypt. So you cannot play those at their Battle Cruiser. Pretty much means pre-con level. Low power is just slightly above that. Mid power.
I looked at just to give a small anecdote today. I was looking at they had a list of sample Battle Cruiser decks, and I looked at them and I saw, Battle Cruiser Urza. I wonder what's in here, and I just about lost my mind looking at the deck because it was a Urza artifact deck with a bunch of artifact payoffs, like 5 affinity for artifacts cards, cards like what's the draw a card for the highest CMC among artifacts you control, and there were 10 total artifacts in the deck, and the highest CMC artifact was 4. And there was Glintoness Crane, which gets an artifact with the top 4 cards, and there's 10 in the deck, and I fucking lost my mind. I was like, I guess this is how you make a Battle Cruiser Urza deck. You just don't put artifacts in it. And all the artifacts that were in it were freaking mana rocks. You can't even tap them for mana with Urza. Sorry, that was a bit of a... Go ahead and tell the other banned cards, Eli.
Yeah, Battle Cruiser is a special place.
Yeah.
But yeah, then the mid-power level, I think that's kind of just from their definition here. I'm not going to read out the thing. But it seems like the average commander power level of, that you might see on an average basis. Maybe
a Game Nights video. An average Game Nights, not like I'm stuttering over myself. Not their high-powered decks, but just,
Yeah.
Maybe 70% of Game Nights videos would be a mid-power game, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. That seems right. And then they have a couple other banned cards. They have Thassa's Oracle with Demonic Consultation or a Tainted Pact. banned at high, mid, low, and battlecruiser.
Everything outside of the CEDH level, pretty
Everything
much.
aside from maximum power.
That's what they call it, by the way. It's not us.
It's just a pretty good name.
And then, of course, Negan the Cold-Blooded banned at all levels.
Because he's a bad man.
Yep.
And
we're not allowing bad men in this. Seems weird to ban Negan and not the other. I guess it's because of they had like a big discussion over this, right?
Well, from my perspective, especially if we're going off of the show, in my opinion, Rick is just as bad of a man.
Does Rick do a lot of bad things?
No, he's just cringe.
Oh, okay. He's just cringe.
I just don't like him.
Fair enough. But yeah, what I don't know what else to say about this except for if you're looking to like dive into it, go and read the 21-page document. I think this is not the solution, by the way.
I would advise, especially if you're newer to Commander, don't let your first experience be on the Play EDH Discord server.
Like, there's probably nothing wrong with playing game stuff there, but like, the goal is not to make the power level as complicated as possible. I think the goal is to make it less complicated. So please avoid using a power level discussion that takes 21 pages.
Avoid a compendium.
Yeah,
I would say.
Instead, just listen to an hour and a half podcast by EDH Takes.
If you're a game other than Magic or like literal Dungeons and Dragons, you should not have a compendium.
Yeah, that's true. Before we move on, well, I guess as we move on, do we want to talk about what do you think was common among all of these different, sources we took data from?
Yeah, so I think it's important to pinpoint the commonalities between like these different groups and everything. It's kind of like different cultures, so it's a good way for like getting a pulse on how necessary something is. Like if different cultures across the world like invent their own words for like the same thing, it gives you a pretty good read on like if that thing, or like say like a color or something, if it's something that needs to have a word, right?
Yeah. Are you saying that we're kind of cultural anthropologists, just kind of observing all of the the cultures that are living in their islands?
Well, that's a cool way to think of it. Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
In a way.
Yeah. But yeah, so what are things that were common amongst them all, Eli?
So a common thing amongst all of these, and actually a common thing that I had mentioned to you before we started our notes on this, was the idea of mentioning about how long the games go, or like what turn you can expect to win with a deck.
I think mostly everyone mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, and that could involve like my god hand, like what possible turn could I win with this deck, or just like on average, how long do our games in our play group go?
Yeah. And it's kind of a hard question to answer, but I mean, I think that's a pretty okay way of kind of evaluating the power.
Mm-hmm.
At least generally. Not all the time, but generally.
And I'm sure there are play groups that probably don't really keep track of what turn their games end on, especially as they go longer.
Yeah.
Like once a game goes past 10 turns, you kind of lose track, don't you?
I would say so. And also, I mean, like, I feel like in Commander, it's very easy to overestimate what turn it is, because once games get to turn 6 or 7, so much is happening in a Commander game sometimes that it kind of can feel like a turn 12 when it's actually a turn 8.
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of decisions to make. Most people are ramping pretty hard.
Yeah, the faster players get ramping, the shorter the game is going to go.
That's why maybe it's easy for us to determine what turn it is sometimes, because the two of us sometimes maybe forego a lot of like traditional ramp, like land ramp or something.
Yeah, we're big fans of artifact ramp and stuff. So
and
you
we're
just
real just
lands.
like land drop gamers, so like we know we've hit our land drop.
Yeah, I'd be like
most of the time.
I'd be like, if I hit my land, did I play my land this turn? Well, let's see. I played a land every turn of the game, and I played one, source of land ramp. Yeah, I should have this much. Yeah, you can kind of go back and calculate it if you need to.
So I feel like our games probably end average turn 7-ish.
Sure, 7, some 7, 8, something like that. Yeah.
Or at least turn 7's the point when the game could be ending on any turn.
Yeah, and another thing with game ending is some decks don't really kill all players at once, so maybe game ending means more like killing a player. Because, like...
Yeah, like turn 7, somebody's dying.
Yeah, like if you're playing like an aggro deck, like maybe you could kill someone by turn 7 or so, or turn 8 or whatever.
For impact.
Yeah. Or it's not that it always happens, but it's possible, right? Like on maybe an average game, someone could die by that point, and I think
that's pretty common, actually.
Yeah, in a lot of games. Mm-hmm. Well, it depends, of course, on the decks, right? Because some decks, like I've got a Wizards deck, which definitely is not killing people that quickly.
Yeah, or like like we've played a lot of games with precons against each other, and aside from like there's some pretty, like the Jarina Kudrow deck was pretty aggro, but aside from stuff like that, I feel like most precon games would, for somebody to die before turn 7, it would have to involve multiple players like beating on the same person.
And them just not having creatures to play.
I don't know if the precons are really like capable of knocking out a player before turn 7 by themselves.
I don't think so. Unless it's like all 3 players versus 1 or something.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Or, some extraordinary circumstances that usually involve Soul Ring.
Yeah, they're just their lands enter tapped and their ramp is a little slow, so they just take the first few turns. They take a little longer to get
going.
Off the ground.
Yep, and those first few turns really end up mattering. But besides the turn expectations, I think another common point among all of the sources we looked at was people being honest is just really important, and it's not just important; it's integral. It's necessary.
We say it a lot, but honesty is the best policy.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And I think especially amongst your friends. And you know what? You should extend the same courtesy to strangers, I think.
Yeah. Unless you have a really good reason not to. No, I wouldn't.
Unless they're a dick.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't advise being dishonest to strangers.
Yeah, you don't have to lie to people to win games.
Unless you're...
That's almost like I think we've talked before about my playing at like new metas or like at game stores and stuff, like back in Alexandria or something, like, and it was kind of not a direct lie, but just kind of obfuscating people's expectations by showing up with like pretty well-tuned and like strong Boros decks. And then, like, not necessarily lying and being like, oh, yeah, this deck's like a bad deck. It's just like you kind of let people's expectations work to your advantage.
You're like, oh, I'm playing, whatever, Boros commander deck, like you say the name of your commander, and they're like just not going to think it's very good.
And if they underestimate that, that's kind of on them, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a little something to say about that. Well, so what do you say, Eli? We've been going long enough talking about all of this stuff. Why don't we say we kind of tell the people what they can learn from this, or what they can take away, or what are our takeaways? Because there's a lot to unpack, right?
There's a lot. We put, I'd say, a decent amount of effort into this one. We kind of rushed this one out. We've been pretty lazy this month, but I think we went pretty hard, and there was a lot to listen to and a lot to take in. But man, I think we're still not totally sure on everything, right?
No, certainly not.
And we put in the
hours of listening to everyone's things and talking about it and stuff like that.
So, is it reasonable for the average player to know any of this?
I mean,
some of it's kind of goes without saying, but like the whole power level scale.
The problem is, like, if an average player is going to know some of this, another player is going to know another portion of this. So someone watched the Command Zone video and someone watched the Professor video, and they're not going to see eye to eye. Maybe they watched both, but then the other person watched the EDHREC cast video.
Yeah, and there's some common ground between these that they could maybe be like, oh, yeah, I see what you mean. That's kind of like this thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's...
There's a lot of nuance to it.
A lot of nuance.
And so, coming from that, I think the hot take here is that the power scale just kind of isn't always the best thing to do, and sometimes should just be foregone and just not used. One piece of argument I have for this is sometimes, every once in a while, Eli and I will play on Magic Online, and a lot of times on Magic Online, people will, be like, 7 decks. But other times, people will just put Commander game, and players will join, and then they'll play a game. There was no power level discussion for that game, and it was a random pickup game. And, those games turn out just fine a lot of the times.
It usually seems fine, and, we mostly play amongst each other.
Yeah.
But like I said, we've played it at game stores, too, with strangers, and I don't often have this conversation. I think there's been a couple of times where people have sort of tried to have a conversation with me, mostly just being like, what kind of game are we looking for? Like really strong
basic
stuff or medium stuff. And you have a small, really basic conversation, but not being like throwing out numbers or power rankings or anything.
I think you can just try to, say something like, oh, I'm playing like a pretty strong deck, or I'm playing like a mid-power deck, and like you don't need like it doesn't need to be like mid-power means something. You just say something that kind of elicits that kind of a reaction, and then players will choose something that they think roughly fits, and then you play a game, and if you keep playing, you adjust. You take account of what people played, and you're like, okay, my deck was probably a bit too strong, I'll play something weak next time, or something like that, and that's probably my favorite way to go about it.
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out why it is, in addition to that, why we don't seem to have such a big problem with this. And I think, in my experience, I think we have played games, or at least sometimes I feel like I brought a deck that's a little bit strong.
Yeah.
And everyone just gets you. I feel like even in that situation where you're like a couple steps above somebody, if everyone 3v1s you, it still evens it out. Like, some people might not like that experience. Mm-hmm. I'd feel more bad for the people having to team up on somebody than I would for the person in my position if I brought the strong deck.
Yeah.
And, it can lead to some feel bads, but
yep.
I think it's kind of correcting, and I feel like mostly it might feel good for people if they're in the lower rung to feel like they've toppled the giant or something.
Sure. And the only time that this doesn't work is if the strong deck is much stronger in a way that isn't apparent. So, for example, if someone's playing a much stronger deck, but the reason it's much stronger is because they do a CDH type of flash instant speed win out of nowhere. But I think in the vast majority of cases, if a deck is stronger than other decks, it's pretty easy to tell. Everyone will have that situation where they're like, oh, that guy had a really crazy start. They were obviously playing a stronger deck than us, right? And if that's the case, you as a table, the other three players are able to, at least to some extent, gang up against that player. And I think that does, like you were saying, it does a pretty good job. Maybe not a perfect job, but a pretty good job of assessing that.
Yeah, and in the rare situation, which I have experienced, of somebody literally playing CDH decks at casual Commander night, they're not a real CDH player, and they shouldn't. That person is such a minority that I don't think that should really be on the ranking system, because they shouldn't be in that game. If their deck is so strong that literally 3 players teaming up on them with good decks can't beat them, that's not right. You just don't play with that person.
Yeah. One thing that I would be amiss if I didn't mention, just to cover our bases, is sometimes there's a problem that could happen, which is 3 players end up having really strong decks, and 1 player missed the memo and is just playing a deck that's too weak for everything else. And that can feel pretty bad sometimes. But, sometimes you can just kind of be an underdog, and if you win that game or end up because people probably aren't going to mess with you too much if you are literally leagues below the other 3 players. Mm-hmm. If you end up winning that game, it probably feels better than any other win you've gotten, honestly. So
yeah, definitely, and it happens. We've seen it happen, and I mean, it's definitely they're not often the first person out. I mean, second doesn't count for much, but some people might feel good about that, especially if they have that really weak deck.
Yeah, and the Commander Clash people were talking about how Robert, would just beat them with
Richard.
Richard would beat them with his Bird Tribal deck, which they said was a 4, where their decks were 6s, and they talk about that like it's a great experience and a great memory, right? So I don't see that. If you're making good memories, that could be an awesome way to, why limit yourself to only one type of commander when you could get these kinds of cool memories out of maybe the accidental mismatch every once in a while.
Yeah, exactly. I think I think trying to like super pinpoint like your deck being as exactly as strong as every other deck, I think that really shrinks your experience of the format a lot.
I think so.
It decreases the amount of those cool moments like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So what do you say, Eli? Just for some fun, we try to just give a couple of our decks.
Yeah, let's emulate our boys at the Commander Clash crew,
and we'll just give a couple of our decks, just some rankings and what ranking system we're using. Fuck you. That's the ranking system we're using. Sorry.
Do you want to try and reference the REDH the 1 out of 10 at least?
Fine.
We don't have to use their exact one. We could just like do 1 to 10, like from what we've learned throughout all these.
We'll do a 1 to 10, but like we've said before, 1 to 10 means different things to different people. I'm gonna do 1 to 10 of what it means to me.
Mm-hmm.
So take that with a grain of salt. But let's give it a try. Eli, why don't you go first? What's a deck you want to talk about?
God, let's say this is always a tough one for me to quantify. Maybe my Gisela deck. I feel like it's an 8.
Yeah.
If I had to say, using like the average like of 9 and 10 being like pretty competitive. But it's an interesting deck because it's playing a lot of the way I like to describe it is it's doing its thing as well as I want it to be doing that, but its thing isn't necessarily the most optimized thing, but it is playing very strong cards.
Very strong cards and very strong synergies and stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
And I know you do play a lot of really good ramp in there too.
Yeah, I got Mana Crypt in there. I've got Enlightened Tutor for lots of good stuff.
Smothering Tithe, Wheels,
Smothering
like that.
Tithe. I got Wheel of Fortune, Underworld Breach.
Lots of strong stuff in there. Yeah.
I got my Academy Rector in there.
Yeah. You got the other Rector too, right? To get like Ugin or something.
I got Arena Rector to get Ugin.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, some strong stuff.
But probably not on the 9 level.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm more like to underrate decks, and I think this. I don't know if we talked about this at all yet, but kind of the idea of like the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah,
and how people, when they lack knowledge, tend to overestimate their abilities.
Yeah,
and I think from a third-person perspective, you might see somebody like who's a less experienced commander player, or maybe even like a bad commander player.
Yeah.
And they'll have this deck, and they're like, "Oh, this deck's really good. I'm gonna say this like an 8." Like the professor will talk about his tasted deck, like it's like a near CDH deck, and he'll be like, "Oh yeah, I can win on like turn 3 or 4," and then he'll go on like, "I hate your deck," and just like
get stomped and
get
do
his
nothing.
teeth kicked in and like pretty much do, and you just feel like, "Oh man, I feel kind of bad for him."
Yeah,
you don't want to be that person. So you underrate it because you don't want to like big yourself up and then like get knocked down, right?
Yeah, so you're like, oh, my deck's a 6 when actually maybe it is an 8 or something, so because you don't want to appear like you're overrating your deck, so you end up underrating your deck, which is also equally as bad.
You don't want to look cocky, but then sometimes maybe you just look like a fucking liar.
Yeah, it sucks. But yeah, I don't know. Like your Gisela deck, I don't think you really play any combos. Really, I mean, technically, there's like one with like.
Yeah, we were discussing the other night. I had Smothering Tithe, and I got Wheel of Fortune and Underworld Breach, and that pretty much that is a combo. It's maybe not like what was the word I used?
Deterministic.
Deterministic.
It's not like there's not like an Angel's Grace to like not stop you from decking. You deck them out, but I think you said you just like made a bunch of mana and like Pyrohemia at everyone.
Well, yeah, like from that amount of mana and that amount of resources, like how you'd have to have a really bad deck to
not be able to win
with that.
Yeah.
Or you'd have to like your opponents would have to draw into like all of their free interaction and just like have everything perfect go for him.
Yeah, but in general, I think your deck is just meant like the win. It's like kind of like a control deck where the win con just ends up being hitting people with your commander for one shots, epic one shots eventually, or 2 shots.
Yeah, 2 shots lately. I took out all the 1 shots, but now it's just like she's mostly like a defensive tool because it's so hard to die with just on the battlefield.
You take 0 damage for everything. It's awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, I think I agree with your assessment of that deck. Similarly, I'm going to talk about my Aurelia deck to talk to Sam Boros, and I think that deck is also around an 8 power level. It's got a lot of very powerful and efficient cards. It pretty much is a no bullshit kind of deck where I try not to play any cards that don't do something. Not really many pet cards that I mean, you could argue some are pet cards, but I honestly think they're all good. It's maybe a bit one note in the sense that it does get a little bit hampered if, opponents are like, I'm going to kill Aurelia when she comes out and you're never going to get an attack with her. But that being said, that I'm sure a lot of commander decks that are that powerful you could argue that they're bad without their commander, right? Not to say my deck isn't good without the commander, it's just that, you get a lot more value out of it.
Well, yeah, and it's not, reliant on her.
Yeah, for sure.
All those cards still work fine. I think it's interesting because you don't have a lot of, really
individually
fast mana or any cards, aside from, maybe Dockside Extortionist, I think.
Yeah, there's
that
not
anyone
really...
would point to and say, that's, a busted card.
There's not really any, really offensive cards in there, like a Mana Crypt or anything. I think I only play, 3, if you count them, 3... Well, I guess there's more. No, Mana Rock, except for Soul Ring. I play, Ancient Tomb, Weather Wayfarer. You play stuff like Nykthos. I got, a bunch of the white ways to catch up in lands. But no Mana Rocks in that deck or anything. It's more of a curve-out deck. And a lot of card advantage. A lot of card advantage.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of cards in that deck, like you're playing, in my Gisela deck too, I guess I'm playing, the Bounce Land, and you, think, how could a Bounce Land be in, a deck that you rate at an 8? And it's well, the other cards just kind of make up for it, right? Or, it's actually, kind of a synergy piece.
It's kind of a synergy in that sort of deck, yeah.
Or, you've got, a Rescos Explorer, and, a lot of good cards, but nothing that anyone, I think, would ever see and be like, this card is in an 8 deck.
You see Rescos Explorer, you're like, this is not an 8 if it's playing this, but, sometimes these cards just work out in certain ways.
Well, it's the thing that Josh said, too. It just, playing some, quote, suboptimal cards doesn't necessarily, decrease your deck. If the deck is just strong enough on its own merits.
Yeah. So, okay, Eli, well, maybe you want to think of a deck that's a little bit more lower power level to talk about that you have. Do you have anything you can think of?
Yeah, so I'd say, I have this kind of suite of 3-color decks, which I feel like I would probably rank them all around a 6.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me on the scale, I don't like the REDH scale. I don't like having precons above, maybe this is kind of a hot take, I don't like them above 2.
Sure.
So I think that shrinks the scale too much. I like to think that 5 to me means average. So if I have a deck that's 5 or 6, that feels good to me.
Yeah, maybe an upgraded precon could get up to a 4, maybe, if it's really good.
Yeah, they had a discussion on the MTG Goldfish Commander Clash podcast when they moved decks down to 6. They were kind of discussing doesn't it kind of feel bad though to call your deck a 6? And it's and one of them or a couple of the guys were like, why though? Why should that feel that's still that should be above average, right?
Yeah, and it's
but I think there's just this association with
anything below a 7's bad, right?
Yeah,
that's what it feels like.
But I feel 6 is really above average. That's kind of bigging yourself up, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I'd say my my Varina tokens deck might be that one might be, of my 3-color decks, might be a little stronger, but maybe the Arcades deck.
Maybe, I'm not sure.
The wall deck.
I don't know.
Or Kresh. Maybe. I kind of hold them all around the same level. And even my Marchesa deck, the Near Death Experience deck, its win conditions are really weird and pretty hard to pull off, but it's playing a lot of good cards, and I think it's just kind of doing good stuff. I have a lot of fun with it too, and
yeah, and putting these decks at a 6 isn't to say that they're bad decks. They'll all do very strong stuff if left to their devices or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Or with good draws. But it's just kind of there's a separation between that and maybe your Gisela deck, as you're kind of saying.
Yeah, they're slightly weaker, but they're still doing good things, and they're doing it pretty consistently. Yeah.
Okay. For me, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach here. I'm going to talk about I don't even remember the name of the card. I'm put it on screen. It's the Jin, the Freet.
Oh,
it's a card. It does things. But don't worry about it. Okay. It's stolen or not stolen strategy.
Stolen strategy.
Stolen strategy. It's a MDFC, one of the deans. Uvilda and something. Is that it? I don't remember. Sorry, guys. It's my own commander deck. I don't know its name. This is a mono. It's a blue and red Dean, and I only play the back half as red, so it's a mono red deck. And what it says is, stolen strategy. So on your upkeep, each opponent exiles top card of their library. You can cast this turn, and it gets a counter when you cast a card from exile. This is a deck that plays 50 lands and 50 mana rocks and nothing else. So this is the power level I'm going to rank this deck is -1. This deck doesn't go on the scale because it's not a deck, okay?
Nasari, Dean of Expression.
There you go.
I'll tell you what, you played this deck one time. You almost killed me. Because she gets counters when you cast the spells from exile.
Okay.
She gets pretty big.
It's not my fault that I almost killed you the first turn she was...
I should have just played removal.
No. The first turn that she was alive, she flipped your extra turn spell.
Yeah.
It wasn't my fault. No, but it's a very weird thing because obviously you have a lot of mana and stuff, but literally if the commander is not in play on my upkeep, the deck cannot do a single thing. There's just mana rocks and lands and there's nothing else. So
yeah, actually I think after my near death experience in that game, I was at over halfway dead commander damage, and I just thought, feel bad about this. I just gotta bounce her back to the hand or something. And then it's yeah, you're right. You don't really...
Literally nothing possible. So I'm just saying. So this is a very strange theme deck, and I think it's a good example of a deck that doesn't fit on the scale. Mm-hmm. It just goes below the scale, or even maybe not below, but it's not
a fun experiment.
It's an experiment.
It's a cool deck to have to play in lower power games, and if people are playing cards they maybe shouldn't be within their range, to be you did this. This is what this feels like.
Yeah. So it's kind of a good meme. I'm probably going to rebuild it into something that's actually a deck. The funny thing is I have a 2 Izzet decks now. One of them is mono blue, one of them is mono red. Very cool. But yes, that's a -1 or whatever, a 0. Very cool.
Man, no. Were there any other decks you think we should talk about, or
I mean, we could. I mean, just for the sake of maybe putting a real deck for mine on the list. I think I have my like I just mentioned, my mono blue Izzet deck that I just mentioned. I think that deck probably fits somewhere around a 5.
That feels right.
Just because it's built intentionally to play with lower power levels. It plays a lot of really bad it plays the bad free counter spells but not in a good way.
Days.
Yeah, Days, and not in a way that I can recuperate the value. It's specifically a spell slinger / wizards deck, but without spells that really are impactful.
Well, it's not I feel like most wizards decks are kind of like combo wizards.
Yeah,
it's not a combo deck.
Oh yeah, this is Kaza. Sorry,
Kaza Royal Shaper.
Didn't mention that. The biggest. I don't play any X spell draw cards to do things. Most of the ways that things I'm doing with the free mana is I'm playing a Talent of the Telepath or something stupid for 4 mana like that. Or I guess there's one Clone Legion. I think that's the biggest.
Oh yeah, Clone Legion's good.
That's one card. Other than that, everything else.
So you have
4 mana.
that, and I feel the other win condition is wait until you draw the Galecaster Colossus. Mm-hmm. Use that to bounce people's blockers out of the way on end step, and then just swing in with Galecaster and Wizards.
Yeah, but that's not that. That's 2 ways. That's the one way it could possibly win was Galecaster Colossus, and that's 1 card, and it's not even it's not immune to removal. You can't bounce itself, and it attacks for 7 or something, or 6 or 8, whatever it is.
Very fair deck. Very fair blue deck.
Yeah. So that being said, I mean,
God, this power level thing, these scales 1 to 10. It's not a perfect system, is it?
No, it's not. It sucks.
I feel like somebody could do a better job.
True.
We probably should. Maybe we'll get to that. We'll see.
Yeah. Based.
But yeah, really, no. It's a tough thing to do, and in general, just don't worry about it so much. Play what you want to play. You should consider people's feelings, but I think there's a very philosophical thing about how expectations can really sour your experiences. And God, this is going to be a really rough thing to say, but maybe you shouldn't even go into every Commander game expecting to have fun.
Yeah, maybe that will lead you more astray than it helped. Or maybe that'll help you. I guess what you're saying will help you more than hurt you.
Yeah, just don't expect that everything's always, that you're in control of everything like this. I think this whole thing is a big, the world is...
The world is big, and maybe you don't... There's entropy in the universe.
We're always trying to put things into boxes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work.
Yeah. Maybe I think you're onto something there with the idea that players really just want to have control over, what's going to happen in a game, or like what kind of game it's going to be. But like, really, people are unpredictable, and it's you shouldn't get yourself so wound up and focused on control that you're disappointed when it doesn't happen.
Yeah, just try and make the best out of things. Learn from your experiences. You will find, just naturally, like-minded people who you enjoy playing with, and that you don't have to have this discussion with. That's, I think, what happened with us.
Yeah.
We've met those people, and we just found the right thing. It's about the people.
It is. I think it's more about the people than the decks, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I kind of gave earlier in this episode. I gave one of the podcasts shit for having a hour and 40-minute podcast episode, but now we're past that. So
it's been a good discussion. We had to come back strong.
Yeah.
After small absence.
Yeah.
We'll do a shorter episode next time, I think.
Yeah,
that's the plan. Good plan.
Good plan.
Good idea past me.
Yeah, but look forward to that next video. Do the subscription thing if you want.
Yeah, subscribe. We're getting pretty close to. We're like at 150 now. We're past 150. I think.
Yeah, I think we're at like 160.
Keep it rolling.
Appreciate all of the support, especially all the comments are awesome. I know a lot of people have been looking at the tier list videos. Glad you like those. But we're just gonna keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, comment, subscribe. We definitely want to hear your comments on how you handle the power level thing. Also, if I could solicit some advice or help, we're thinking about getting some intro music at some point. And if anyone knows a good website to get that from, hit us up. I mean, we can find it. We can put the effort in. We just haven't yet.
Yeah, just some grade A laziness.
Yeah, just no excuses, just that's it. But if anyone's got any good advice or suggestions, we are willing to listen.
I only got so much mental capacity I can devote to the podcast. Just devoting it all to the episode, not the...
You know what we could do?
What?
We could just sing at the start of every episode. Like some other podcasts.
God, no. I want, just as a small aside, I on my podcast app I use, I literally set it to, you can set like a thing to like skip the intro. Like, so you set like, start all these episodes at 30 seconds in. Mm-hmm. And I made a point to set it to whatever it would be to skip the singing at the start of the command zone. But I've been getting owned by that because they only sing when Jimmy or Josh are together. And they've had a lot of episodes recently with, a bunch of different members of the team. So I've had to go back. I'm missing the start.
They figured you out.
Yeah.
They fucking set you up.
Feels bad. Okay, well that's...
But yeah, thank you guys for listening. And we'll be back pretty soon, I think.